There once lived a man who spent his days behind bars, yet every night he dreamed of walking free through vast open fields. His cell was small, his chains were heavy, but in his dreams he ran without restraint across endless meadows under boundless skies. Each morning he would wake to the same grey walls, the same iron bars, the same cold chains around his wrists. Yet something extraordinary began to happen. The more vividly he dreamed of freedom, the more real that freedom became to him, not as a distant hope, but as a present reality that existed somewhere beyond the physical world of his confinement. This prisoner discovered what few ever dare to understand. He learned that there are two worlds we inhabit simultaneously. There is the world of facts, where chains are chains and bars are bars. And there is the world of truth, where consciousness reigns supreme and imagination is the only reality. Most people live their entire lives imprisoned by the world of facts, never realizing that the world of truth is where all power resides. They see their circumstances as fixed, their limitations as permanent, their dreams as merely fantasies that have no bearing on their actual experience. But what if I told you that this prisoner's story is your story? What if the chains that bind you are not made of iron, but of assumption? What if the bars that confine you are not made of steel, but of belief? What if everything you consider to be fixed and unchangeable about your life is actually as fluid and malleable as the dreams you dream each night? The truth that has been hidden from humanity for centuries is this: you are not the victim of your circumstances. You are not at the mercy of external forces. You are not a prisoner of your past or your present conditions. You are the operant power in your own experience. You are the one who determines what becomes real in your world. And to the moment you truly understand this, the moment you begin to live from this understanding rather than toward it, everything changes. Most people spend their lives trying to change their circumstances through action, through effort, through struggle. They believe that if they work hard enough, if they try hard enough, if they deserve it enough, then maybe, just maybe, their circumstances will improve. This is living from the outside in. This is accepting the world of facts as primary and hoping that somehow, someday, external conditions will shift in their favor. But there is another way. There is a way of living from the inside out, where you recognize that consciousness is the only reality and that circumstances are simply the shadow cast by the light of your own awareness. This is the way of assumption. This is the way of the fulfilled life. When you live from assumption, you do not wait for evidence to believe. You do not require proof to know. You do not need circumstances to change before you can feel fulfilled. Instead, you assume the feeling of the wish fulfilled right now, in this moment, regardless of what your senses report. They discover that when they align with the law of assumption, all the forces of creation conspire to bring their assumptions to pass. The practical application of living from fulfillment is not complicated, but it is completely different from everything you have been taught about how life works. Instead of trying to change your circumstances through action, you change your circumstances through assumption. Instead of working harder to get what you want, you assume that you already have what you want and let that assumption guide your actions. Instead of waiting for evidence to believe, you believe first and let the evidence follow. Every morning when you wake, instead of immediately focusing on your problems, your lacks, your limitations, you assume the feeling of your wish fulfilled. You imagine yourself already living in your desired state. You feel what it would feel like to have accomplished your goals, to have resolved your problems, to have transcended your current limitations. You do not do this as a technique to make something happen. You do this as a recognition of what is already true in consciousness. Throughout the day, whenever your attention is drawn to unwanted conditions, you gently redirect it to your fulfilled state. When others speak of lack, you silently assume abundance. When circumstances suggest limitation, you quietly assume possibility. When problems arise, you immediately assume their solution. You do not argue with appearances. You do not fight against conditions. You simply persist in the assumption of your desired state. This is not positive thinking. This is not denial of reality. This is the recognition that consciousness is the only reality and that external conditions are simply consciousness made visible. When you change your consciousness, you change your world. When you assume a new state, you create a new experience. When you live from fulfillment, fulfillment becomes your experience. The key is persistence. Not the persistence of effort, but the persistence of assumption. You must persist in your desired state until it becomes your natural state. You must assume you're good until assuming you're good becomes automatic. You must live from fulfillment until living from fulfillment becomes your normal mode of being. This requires constant vigilance over your inner conversations, your emotional reactions, your habitual assumptions. It requires catching yourself whenever you slip back into the old consciousness of lack, limitation, and separation. It requires redirecting your attention again and again to your desired state until that state becomes so familiar, so natural, so automatic that you could not imagine being anything else. In relationships, instead of trying to change others, you assume they already embody the qualities you desire to see in them. Instead of focusing on their faults, their limitations, their problems, you persistently assume their perfection, their success, their happiness. This is not pretense. This is seeing them as they truly are in consciousness, rather than as they appear to be in circumstances. In your career, instead of working from the consciousness of struggle, competition, and scarcity, you assume the consciousness of success, contribution, and abundance. You feel yourself already established in your ideal profession. You assume the satisfaction of meaningful work, adequate compensation, and perfect relationships with colleagues and clients. You live from this assumption until it becomes your experience. In your health, instead of focusing on symptoms, diseases, and limitations, you assume perfect vitality, boundless energy, and radiant well-being. You feel yourself already whole, already healthy, already functioning at optimal levels in every system of your body. You persist in this assumption regardless of temporary appearances. In your finances, instead of thinking from lack, struggle, and limitation, you assume abundance, prosperity, and financial freedom. You feel the security of having more than enough, the joy of being able to give generously, the peace of being free from financial worry. You live from this assumption until money flows to you as naturally as breath flows through your lungs. This is not about forcing anything to happen. This is about aligning with what wants to happen through you. This is not about manipulating circumstances. This is about allowing circumstances to rearrange themselves to match your consciousness. This is not about making things happen. This is about letting things happen by being the person to whom they naturally happen. As more people awaken to this truth, as more individuals begin to live from consciousness rather than from circumstances, as more human beings realize their creative power and begin to use it consciously and responsibly, we are witnessing the birth of a new kind of human being, not a superhuman or a different species, but humanity awakened to its true nature and divine potential. These awakened individuals are not trying to escape the world or transcend physical existence. They are transforming the world by transforming consciousness. They are not seeking to dominate others or accumulate power over external circumstances. They are recognizing the power that operates through consciousness itself and aligning with it for the benefit of all. When enough people understand that consciousness is the only reality, that love is the fundamental force of creation, that separation is an illusion of the senses, then war becomes impossible because you cannot war against yourself. Poverty becomes obsolete because abundance is recognized as the natural state of consciousness. Disease becomes unnecessary because perfect health is understood to be the normal expression of harmonious thinking. This is not utopian dreaming. This is the inevitable result of consciousness awakening to itself. This is the natural evolution of humanity from unconscious creation to conscious creation, from victim consciousness to creator consciousness, from separation consciousness to unity consciousness. Every person who awakens to their creative power, every individual who begins to live from fulfillment rather than from lack, every human being who assumes their desired state and persists in that assumption until it manifests contributes to this collective awakening. Each awakened consciousness becomes a beacon of possibility for others, a living demonstration that limitation is not necessary, that problems are not permanent, that circumstances can be transcended through the transformation of assumption. The ripple effects of even one person living from fulfillment consciousness spread far beyond what the mind can calculate. When you assume you're good and persist in that assumption until it becomes your experience, you're not just changing your own life. You are changing the collective consciousness of humanity. You're adding light to the world. You are contributing to the awakening of the species. This is why your awakening matters. This is why your assumptions matter. This is why your consciousness matters. You are not just creating your own experience. You are participating in the creation of a new world, a world where human beings recognize their divine nature and use their creative power for the highest good of all. Now you stand at the crossroads of your own existence. You have heard the truth about consciousness and its creative power. You understand that you are not a victim of circumstances, but the creator of circumstances. You know that you can assume any state, feel any feeling, live from any level of consciousness you choose. The question now is not whether this knowledge is true. The question is whether you will apply it. The question is not whether consciousness creates reality. The question is what reality you will create through your consciousness. The question is not whether you have the power. The question is how you will use the power that you have always possessed but perhaps never consciously exercised. You can continue to live as you have been living, assuming your limitations, accepting your conditions, waiting for external circumstance. Is to change before you allow yourself to feel fulfilled. This is the path of the majority, the path of unconscious creation, the path of effect trying to change cause. Or you can begin right now to live from the assumption of your wish fulfilled. You can start this very moment to feel what it would feel like to already be what you want to be, to already have what you want to have, to already live as you want to live. This is the path of conscious creation, the path of cause creating effect, the path of the awakened human being. The choice is always yours, and the choice is always now. Consciousness does not judge your choice. The law of assumption does not punish you for choosing limitation or reward you for choosing expansion. It simply gives you exactly what you assume, exactly what you expect, exactly what you feel to be true about yourself and your world. But know this, the prison door has always been unlocked. The chains that bind you are made of nothing but assumed necessity. The limitations that constrain you exist only in consciousness and can be dissolved by consciousness. You are not the prisoner dreaming of freedom. You are freedom itself, dreaming that you are a prisoner. The moment you assume your freedom, you are free. The moment you assume your fulfillment, you are fulfilled. The moment you assume your power, you are powerful. This is not something that will happen in the future when conditions are right. This is something that happens right now when consciousness recognizes its own creative authority. Live from fulfillment and circumstances must obey. This is not a promise for tomorrow. This is a truth for today. This is not a hope for the future. This is a reality for right now. You are the operant power in your own experience, and the time for operating consciously, deliberately, and lovingly is this eternal moment in which you find yourself. The dreamer is awake. The creator is conscious. The power is present. What will you assume? What will you feel? What will you become? The choice, as always, is entirely yours. You live as though your desire is already accomplished, not because you are trying to make it happen, but because in the realm of consciousness, it already is accomplished. This is perhaps the most revolutionary idea ever conceived, and it is the reason why those who understand it have always been persecuted, silenced, or dismissed as dreamers and fools. Because if people truly understood that they create their own reality through the power of assumption, the entire structure of society would crumble overnight. Every system of control, every institution of power, every hierarchy of authority depends on people believing that they are powerless, that they are at the mercy of forces beyond their control. But you are not powerless. You have never been powerless. You are the dreamer dreaming the dream of your life. And the moment you stop identifying with the dream and start identifying with the dreamer, you realize that you can change any aspect of your experience simply by changing your assumption about it. This is not the law of attraction, where you send out vibrations and hope that the universe will respond favorably. This is not about positive thinking or visualization exercises or affirmations repeated endlessly while you still doubt their efficacy. This is about assumption, which is far more powerful than attraction, because assumption does not ask or hope or wish or want. Assumption declares. Assumption knows. Assumption lives from the end. When you assume something, you take it for granted. You do not question it, you do not doubt it, you simply accept it as true and live from that acceptance. This is why assumption is so powerful and why it is so different from attraction. Attraction implies separation between you and what you desire. Assumption implies unity. Attraction looks toward the future. Assumption lives in the present. Attraction hopes for change. Assumption embodies change. The ancient teachings understood this principle, though they clothed it in symbol and metaphor to protect it from those who would misuse it. They spoke of the kingdom of heaven being within, of faith moving mountains, of becoming as little children to enter the kingdom. They knew that consciousness is the only reality and that the external world is simply consciousness objectified, consciousness made manifest, consciousness pushed out into visible form. These were not religious teachings in the way we understand religion today. They were scientific teachings about the nature of reality itself. They were instruction manuals for the operation of consciousness. They were blueprints for the creation of experience. But over time, these teachings were corrupted, literalized, and institutionalized until their true meaning was lost and only the outer shell remained. The mystics of every tradition have always known this truth. The Hermetic philosophers spoke of the principle that as above, so below. meaning that the inner world of consciousness is reflected in the outer world of experience. The Kabbalists taught that the universe is constructed through the power of the word, which is nothing other than consciousness speaking reality into existence. The Vedantic sages declared that Brahman, the ultimate reality, is pure consciousness, and that everything else is Maya, the play of consciousness appearing as the world. But these teachings were always reserved for the few, the initiated, the ones who had proven themselves worthy of such knowledge. They were never meant for the masses, because the masses were not ready to handle such power. They were content to live as victims of circumstance, as prisoners of their own limited thinking, as subjects of forces they believed to be greater than themselves. Yet the time has come for this knowledge to be revealed openly, for humanity to understand its true nature and step into its divine inheritance. The time has come for people to stop living as beggars in the kingdom of consciousness and start living as the kings and queens they were always meant to be. This is why the study of consciousness, the understanding of how reality is constructed through the power of assumption, is not just interesting speculation or philosophical entertainment. It is the most practical knowledge you could ever possess. It is the key to unlocking every door, the solution to every problem, the answer to every question you have ever had about how to live a fulfilling life. When you understand that consciousness is the only reality, you stop being a victim and become a creator. When you understand that assumption hardens into fact, you stop hoping for change and start embodying change. When you understand that feeling is the secret, you stop thinking your way to fulfillment and start feeling your way to fulfillment. The laboratory of consciousness is always open, always available, always ready for your experiments. Every moment of every day, you are either assuming limitation or assuming possibility. You are either assuming lack or assuming abundance. You are either assuming separation or assuming unity. You are either assuming powerlessness or assuming power. There is no in-between. There is no neutral ground. You are always assuming something, and whatever you assume with feeling becomes your experience. This is the great secret that has been hidden in plain sight throughout all of human history. This is the pearl of great price that wise men have sought across continents and centuries. This is the philosopher's stone that transforms base metals into gold, the elixir of life that grants immortality, the holy grail that provides eternal fulfillment. But it is not hidden in some distant land or guarded by some secret society. It is within you. It has always been within you. It is you. The ancients understood this profound truth about consciousness, but they wrapped it in symbols, parables, and sacred mysteries to protect it from those who were not ready to wield such power responsibly. In the temples of Egypt, the initiates learned that Khnum, the ram-headed god, fashioned human beings on his potter's wheel not from clay but from consciousness itself. They understood that the physical world was nothing more than consciousness crystallized into form, and that by changing their consciousness, they could reshape their reality as easily as a potter reshapes clay. The mystery schools of Greece taught this same principle through elaborate rituals and ceremonies designed to shift the consciousness of the initiate from identification with the mortal body to identification with the immortal soul. They knew that when a person truly realizes their divine nature, when they understand that they are not separate from the creative power of the universe but are expressions of it, then miracles become natural. The impossible becomes possible, and limitation dissolves like shadows before the dawn. In the sacred halls of these ancient institutions, students learned that what we call magic is simply the science of consciousness applied with precision and understanding. They discovered that the gods and goddesses of their pantheons were not external beings to be worshipped and appeased, but aspects of their own consciousness to be awakened and embodied. They realized that every myth, every legend, every sacred story was actually a psychological teaching disguised as entertainment, a roadmap for the transformation of consciousness encoded in symbol and metaphor. The Hebrew scriptures contain the same teaching, though it has been obscured by centuries of literal interpretation and institutional dogma. When Moses declared that God's name is I am that I am, he was not describing some distant deity residing in the clouds. He was revealing the fundamental nature of consciousness itself. The great I am is not a being separate from you. The great I am is you, the very awareness that is reading these words right now, the consciousness that looks out through your eyes and thinks through your mind. When the scriptures command you to be transformed by the renewing of your mind, they are not suggesting a gradual process of moral improvement or intellectual development. They are describing the instantaneous shift that occurs when you stop identifying wit. at your circumstances and start identifying with your consciousness. They are pointing to the moment when you realize that you are not the person things happen to, but the power through which all things happen. This is why the teachings speak of faith moving mountains. Not faith as blind belief in unprovable doctrines, but faith as the assumption of the wish fulfilled. Not faith as hope for future salvation, but faith as present moment embodiment of your desired state. When you assume the feeling of your wish fulfilled with such conviction that it becomes your predominant mental attitude, mountains of opposing circumstances must move to accommodate your new state of consciousness. But these truths were dangerous to those who sought to control the masses through fear, limitation, and dependence. Throughout history, anyone who taught that human beings are divine creators responsible for their own experience was branded a heretic, a blasphemer, a threat to the established order. The Gnostics were persecuted for teaching that the kingdom of heaven is within. The mystics were burned for declaring that God and man are one. The alchemists were hunted for revealing that the true philosopher's stone is consciousness itself. The keepers of orthodoxy understood instinctively that if people realized their true power, their infinite creative potential, their fundamental unity with the source of all existence, then no external authority could maintain control over them. A person who knows that they create their own reality through the power of assumption cannot be enslaved by promises of future reward or threats of future punishment. They cannot be manipulated by those who claim to have special access to divine favor or cosmic truth. So the knowledge was driven underground, preserved in secret societies, encoded in alchemical texts, hidden within fairy tales and folk stories. It survived in fragments and whispers, passed from teacher to student in hidden chambers and sacred groves, waiting for the time when humanity would be ready to reclaim its birthright of conscious creation. That time is now. The laboratory of consciousness is open to all who dare to enter, and within this laboratory, ancient wisdom and modern science converge to reveal the same fundamental truth about the nature of reality. When quantum physicists tell us that the observer affects the observed, they are rediscovering what the mystics have always known. When they demonstrate that particles exist in a state of infinite possibility until consciousness collapses the wave function into definite form, they are describing the mechanics of manifestation in scientific language. The famous double-slit experiment reveals that light behaves as a wave when unobserved and as a particle when observed. This is not just a curious property of photons. This is a fundamental principle of existence itself. Reality exists in a state of infinite potential until consciousness observes it into specific form. You are not just witnessing reality. You are creating it moment by moment through the act of observation, through the filter of your assumptions, through the lens of your beliefs and expectations. Modern neuroscience has discovered that the brain does not simply receive and process sensory information. It actively constructs our experience of reality based on our beliefs, expectations, and prior conditioning. The reticular activating system filters millions of bits of information every second, allowing into conscious awareness only that which aligns with our current mental programming. We literally see what we expect to see, hear what we expect to hear, and experience what we expect to experience. But mainstream science stops short of the ultimate conclusion that consciousness is not produced by the brain, but is the fundamental substrate from which both brain and world arise. They acknowledge that consciousness affects reality, but cannot bring themselves to admit that consciousness is reality. They recognize that the observer influences the observed, but refuse to consider that the observer creates the observed through the very act of observation infused with assumption. This is where ancient wisdom surpasses modern knowledge. The mystics understood that consciousness is not an emergent property of complex neural networks, but the irreducible foundation of all existence. They knew that imagination is not a mental faculty among others, but the creative power of God operating through human awareness. They realized that when you imagine something with feeling, with conviction, with the assumption that it is already accomplished, you are not just daydreaming. You are literally constructing the future out of the infinite field of possibility. Imagination is not fantasy. Imagination is spiritual sensation. When you imagine yourself in your desired state, when you feel what it would feel like to already possess what you want to possess, to already be what you want to be, to already have accomplished what you want to accomplish, you are not pretending. You are not lying to yourself. You are not engaging in wishful thinking. You are exercising the divine faculty through which all creation occurs. This is the laboratory where ancient wisdom and modern science meet, where mysticism and physics converge, where the spiritual and the practical unite in the recognition that consciousness is the only reality, and that everything else is consciousness taking form according to the assumptions held within awareness itself. Every moment of every day, you are conducting experiments in this laboratory, whether you realize it or not. Every assumption you make is a hypothesis being tested. Every feeling you sustain is an experiment in progress. Every belief you hold is a creative instruction being executed by the infinite intelligence that operates through you. The state of fulfillment is not a destination you arrive at after your circumstances change. The state of fulfillment is the starting point from which all change occurs. Most people have this backwards. They believe they will feel fulfilled when they get what they want, when they achieve what they desire, when they obtain what they lack. But this is the logic of the world turned upside down. This is Ik trying to create cause. This is the tail trying to wag the dog. Fulfillment is not a reward for achievement. Fulfillment is the condition that makes achievement inevitable. When you live from the state of fulfillment, when you assume the feeling of the wish fulfilled not as a technique to get something, but as a recognition of what is already true in consciousness, then circumstances must rearrange themselves to match your inner state. This is not wishful thinking. This is not positive psychology. This is the fundamental law of consciousness. To understand the difference between wanting and having, between lack consciousness and fulfillment consciousness, you must understand that these are not just different thoughts or different attitudes. These are different states of being that create entirely different worlds of experience. When you want something, you are assuming that you do not have it. You are identifying with lack, with separation, with incompleteness. This assumption of lack becomes the creative instruction that perpetuates the experience of lack. But when you have something in consciousness, when you assume that your desire is already fulfilled, when you live from the state of satisfaction rather than the state of craving, you are giving an entirely different creative instruction to the infinite intelligence that operates through you. You are aligning yourself with the reality you desire rather than the reality you want to escape from. This is why feeling is the secret, not thinking is the secret, not visualizing is the secret, not affirming is the secret. Feeling is the secret because feeling is the language of creation. Feeling is how consciousness communicates with itself. Feeling is the bridge between the invisible and the visible, between the imagined and the manifest, between the desired and the experienced. When you feel grateful for something you do not yet see, you are assuming its presence. When you feel relieved about a problem that has not yet been solved, you are assuming its resolution. When you feel proud of an accomplishment that has not yet occurred, you are assuming its completion. These feelings are not pretense. These feelings are not self-deception. These feelings are the actual substance from which your future experience is constructed. But living from fulfillment requires persistence in the face of contradictory evidence. It requires faith in the reality of consciousness when the world of facts seems to prove otherwise. It requires the courage to assume you're good when circumstances suggest you have no right to such assumption. This is perhaps the most challenging aspect of conscious creation, because every fiber of your conditioning will rebel against living from fulfillment when your senses report lack. The world will tell you that you are being unrealistic, impractical, delusional. Others will point to your circumstances as proof that your assumptions are false. Your own mind will present you with evidence from your past to convince you that your desired state is impossible. But if you persist in the assumption of fulfillment, if you continue to live from the end regardless of what the beginning lobe, Oaks, like if you maintain the feeling of the wish fulfilled despite contrary appearances, then the law of consciousness must fulfill itself through your experience. This persistence is not effort. This persistence is rest. It is the rest that comes from knowing rather than hoping, from being rather than becoming, from having in consciousness what you desire to have in experience. It is the persistence of assumption, not the persistence of struggle. It is living from your desired state so consistently that it becomes your natural state, your normal state, your only state. When circumstances must obey consciousness, when the external world reshapes itself to match the inner world of assumption, we witness the most natural law in operation. Yet this law appears miraculous only because we have been conditioned to believe that causation flows from outside to inside, that circumstances create consciousness rather than consciousness creating circumstances. We have been taught to accept our limitations as permanent, our conditions as fixed, our problems as evidence of our powerlessness. But why? Why has humanity been kept in ignorance of its most fundamental creative power? Why have we been taught to worship external authorities when the ultimate authority resides within our own consciousness? Why have we been conditioned to seek salvation from forces outside ourselves when we are the very power through which salvation operates? The answer is both simple and profound. Every system of control, every institution of power, every hierarchy of authority depends upon people believing that they are powerless. If you knew that you create your own reality through the power of assumption, if you understood that your consciousness is the operant power in your experience, if you realize that you are not at the mercy of economic conditions, political systems, or social circumstances, then you could not be controlled, manipulated, or enslaved by those who claim to have power over you. The entire structure of civilization is built upon the false premise that some people have power and others do not, that some are chosen and others are not, that some are worthy and others are not. But if everyone understood that they possess the same creative power, that they are all expressions of the same infinite consciousness, that they are all capable of transforming their experience through the transformation of their assumptions, then the pyramid of control would collapse instantly. This is why the knowledge of conscious creation has been suppressed, distorted, and ridiculed throughout history. This is why those who teach the truth about human creative power are dismissed as unrealistic dreamers, dangerous radicals, or deluded mystics. This is why the masses are kept busy with endless distractions, meaningless conflicts, and artificial scarcities that prevent them from turning inward and discovering their own divine nature. The economic system depends on people believing in scarcity, accepting lack as natural, and working endlessly to acquire what they believe too. Hey, do not have. If people knew that abundance is their birthright, that prosperity is a state of consciousness rather than a collection of external possessions, that they can assume the feeling of wealth and watch it manifest in their experience, then the entire apparatus of artificial scarcity would crumble. The political system depends on people believing that they are powerless, that they need to be governed by others, that their welfare depends on the decisions of external authorities. If people knew that they govern their own experience through the law of assumption, that they create their own security through consciousness, that they are the ultimate authority in their own lives, then the need for external governance would dissolve. The social system depends on people believing in separation, competition, and hierarchy. If people knew that consciousness is one, that what they do to others they do to themselves, that lifting others lifts themselves, then the entire structure of social inequality would transform overnight. The media system depends on people believing that they are victims of circumstances beyond their control, that they must constantly fear threats from outside themselves, that their happiness depends on external conditions. If people knew that they create their own experience through their assumptions, that they are immune to external circumstances when they live from consciousness rather than from conditions, then the apparatus of fear-based programming would lose all power. This is why you have been taught to look outside yourself for answers, for security, for fulfillment, for meaning. This is why you have been conditioned to believe that your worth depends on external validation, that your success depends on external circumstances, that your happiness depends on external conditions. This is why you have been programmed to see yourself as small, limited, powerless, and dependent. But awakening to the truth of your creative power comes with a price that few are willing to pay. When you begin to live from consciousness rather than from circumstances, when you start to assume the feeling of the wish fulfilled regardless of external evidence, when you persist in your desired state despite contrary appearances, you will find yourself living in a different world than those around you. This can be profoundly isolating. While others complain about their circumstances, you will know that they are complaining about their own assumptions made manifest. While others blame external forces for their problems, you will understand that they are seeing their own consciousness reflected back to them. While others seek to change the world by changing conditions, you will know that the only way to change the world is to change consciousness. You will watch people suffer from problems that could be solved instantly through a change of assumption, but you will realize that most people prefer familiar suffering to unfamiliar responsibility. You will see people pray for miracles while simultaneously assuming the continuation of their problems. You will witness people work tirelessly to improve their circumstances while maintaining the very consciousness that created their unwanted circumstances in the first place. The loneliness of awakening comes not from being superior to others, but from operating according to a different set of principles. It comes from knowing that consciousness is the only reality while surrounded by people who believe that circumstances are the only truth. It comes from living from the end while others live from the beginning. It comes from assuming you're good while others assume their limitations. This is why the path of conscious creation requires tremendous courage. It requires the courage to be misunderstood, to be thought foolish, to be considered unrealistic. It requires the courage to persist in your assumptions when everyone around you is telling you that you are wrong. It requires the courage to live from fulfillment when your circumstances suggest that you have no right to feel fulfilled. But those who pay this price, those who persist in the assumption of their desired state, regardless of external opposition, those who live from consciousness rather than from conditions, discover that they are not alone. They discover that they are supported by the infinite intelligence that operates through consciousness itself,